She chewed bark all winter to keep her baby alive. A Lakota chief set meat on her fire. The elk was already down by the time I found her tracks. I had come north along the river break because the herd had moved that direction 3 days prior, and I was following the herd because half my camp was hungry, and a chief who lets his camp go hungry in February is not much of a chief. The elk was down in the snow at the bottom of a draw, one front leg broken where it had punched through a crust, and the animal had rolled. It would have been mine except the tracks that crossed mine were already there, already between me and the animal, smaller moccasin prints pressed deep and urgent. And by the time I came around the stand of bare cottonwood, I saw her kneeling over it with a trade knife working fast. She did not hear me coming, or maybe she did and chose not to look up, which takes more nerve than not hearing. I stopped, watched. She was not from my band. The cut of the dress, the bead pattern on what I could see of her leggings, not Oglala, not Brûlée either. I could not place her at first. She was young, 30 maybe, though it is hard to say with a woman who has been outside in hard weather for a while, and she was thin. Even in the coat, I could see it. The way her shoulders worked over the elk. The motion had a desperation behind it that is not the same as hunger. That is something further down the road from hunger, where a person has stopped feeling the want and is only operating on what the body still knows to do. She pulled free what she needed from the hindquarter, wrapped it in the elk's own hide, stood, and that is when she saw me. She did not run. I'll say that again because it matters. She did not run. She stood at her full height with the wrapped meat against her chest, and she looked at me the way a person looks when they've run out of road. Not defiance exactly. Something past defiance. Finished with being afraid because being afraid takes energy she didn't have. I asked her in Lakota where she came from. She answered in Lakota, with a Cheyenne word dropped in the middle the way people do when they've lived on a border between languages their whole life. She said she was Cheyenne on her mother's side, Lakota on her father's, and that she was alone. I asked about the tracks I'd seen on the way in, 2 sets. The second set was very small. She said the baby was 6 months. She said it like a fact about the weather. I looked at the meat in her arms and I looked at her face, and I did not say what a man says when he wants something from a woman. I said, "Where is your fire?" She didn't want to tell me. I understood that. A woman alone with an infant who tells a strange man where her fire is, even a Lakota man, even a chief, has made herself very easy to find. She looked at the bundle of meat. She looked at me. She made a calculation. She told me. The camp she'd made was in a limestone overhang half a mile east, out of the wind, barely. A small fire, almost no fuel left, and in the coat arranged beside it the child. The child was asleep and not a good color, white around the mouth in a way that is not from cold alone. I did not go inside the overhang. I set down the elk quarter I'd brought. I'd taken more than she had, because I still had the bow and the animal was still there, and it wasn't going anywhere. And I set it just at the edge of her fire's reach where she could get to it without coming close to me, and I turned and started back. She said, "Why?" Not thank you, not who are you, why? I said because the child needs meat. She said I didn't owe her anything. I said I know that. She said her name was Wombly Win. Her father had named her for the eagle because she was born in the high country, and he said the first sound she made was not a cry but something else. I said my name. My real name, not the chief's name, the ceremonial name, the name my mother gave me when I was small. She looked at me a long time. The fire snapped. The child made a sound in its sleep, not a cry, just a small breath sound, and her head turned toward it the way a compass needle turns north, before she could stop it, before she even thought to. That motion right there. I left. I came back the next morning with wood. She was up, the child fed and wrapped and strapped against her. The color was a little better. She had cooked some of the meat overnight, and there was grease on her lips she hadn't bothered to wipe, which told me how long it had been since she'd had enough to eat. That kind of hunger forgets manners and doesn't care. She looked at the wood I carried. She looked at me. She said, "Are you going to want something for this?" I said no. She said, "Men want something." I said, "I know, I don't." She said, "Why should I believe that?" I said she shouldn't necessarily. That belief wasn't required. I was going to leave wood and go. What she did with it after was her matter. I left the wood. I came back that afternoon with 2 rabbits, cleaned, and a bladder of tallow I'd had in my pack that I hadn't thought of the day before. The tallow was for treating leather, but it would do better work in a starving woman's fire with a sick infant. She was sitting outside the overhang in the thin sun, nursing the child, her back against the limestone. She didn't cover herself or turn away when I came around the bend, and that was not invitation, that was exhaustion past modesty, and I understood it the same way. I set the rabbits on a flat rock near her fire. She said, "You're a chief." I said, "Yes." She said, "Where's your band?" I said, "A day south." She said, "You're riding a day out of your way to bring a stranger rabbits." I said the rabbits weren't far out of my way, which was not entirely true. She almost smiled. It wasn't a full smile, more the shape the mouth makes when a smile might happen if conditions changed a little. The child was watching me with the large, still eyes that infants have, the ones that look like they know something. I asked what was wrong with it. With him, I could see now it was a boy. She said cold, mostly, and that she hadn't had enough milk for 2 months and she had been chewing things. Bark, mostly. Willow bark. To make something for him to swallow when the milk wasn't enough. She said it plain, chewing bark. I sat down on a rock, and I looked at the fire for a while. She said, "You don't have to do that face." I said, "What face?" She said, "The one men make when they feel sorry. I'm not interested in being felt sorry for. I kept him alive." She had too. Whatever had happened to her, and I had not asked, would not ask until she wanted to tell, she had been alone out here in a hard February, and the child was breathing. I said, "I know, I can see that." She looked at me. I said, "I'm not here because I feel sorry. I'm here because this is what a man does." She was quiet for a while. The child made a fist around her finger. She said, "What man are you?" I said, "The kind who doesn't explain himself much." She made a sound. It might have been a laugh. I went back to my band that night. I told my cousin, who is also my second in command, what I had found and where. He is a good man, my cousin, but he is also the kind of man who says what he is thinking before he can stop himself. He said, "Is she beautiful?" I said that was not the point. He said, "But is she?" I didn't answer him. He said I should bring her to the camp. That a woman and an infant alone in a rock shelter in February was a disgrace on the whole band, that we should not have known about it and done nothing. I said I wasn't doing nothing. He said, "Riding out alone to bring her rabbits is not the same as giving her a proper place." I said I knew that too. He let it rest. I did not sleep well. I lay in the dark and I thought about the willow bark, the particular ordinariness of it. Chewing bark into a pulp and feeding it to an infant with her finger. No ceremony, no speech, no asking anyone for help. Just doing the next thing because the next thing was what kept him breathing. I had been a chief for 11 years. I had made decisions that cost men's lives and decisions that saved them. I had sat in councils that went until dawn. I had been asked to lead in fights and to counsel in peace and to judge in disputes. I was not new to wait. But lying there, I felt something specific and hard to name. A thing like recognition. The way you recognize a kind of ground you have walked before, even if the country is different. She carried weight the same way I did. Not gracefully, not without cost, but continuously, without setting it down. without asking to be relieved of it. I respected that the way I respected very few things. In the morning, I went back with 3 of my men and a travois. She heard us coming. She was standing outside with the child strapped to her and the trade knife in her hand, open, and she was not pointing it at anyone in particular, but it was in her hand. Her eyes went to each of us and settled on me. I said, "Put that away." She said, "Not until I know what this is." I said, "It's a travois." She said, "I can see that." I said, "You're going to freeze out here when the next storm comes. There's a storm coming in 3 days. The child won't take another one." She said, "I've been managing." I said, "I know." She said, "Then why?" I said, "Because my camp has room, and I don't leave women in rock shelters in February when I have room." She looked at my men. My cousin had the sense to look elsewhere. The other 2 were young enough to be nervous, which was good. A nervous man does nothing stupid. She said, "What is expected of me?" I said, "Nothing, you're a guest." She said, "Guests leave." I said, "When you're ready." She looked at me for a long time. The child was watching over her shoulder with those eyes. She put the knife away. The women in my camp received her the way women receive a stranger with a child, which is to say, they received the child first and her second and her pride third, and she bore all of it without complaint. My cousin's wife gave her a place to sleep near the center fire, which is not where you put a stranger. That was a decision of its own. The child ate well for the first time. I could hear it from outside, the sound a fed infant makes, that particular businesslike intensity. She sat in the camp for 3 days and did not take charity well. On the second day I found her outside splitting wood, the child tied to her back, working with an axe that was a little too heavy for her, working hard. My cousin's wife came out and tried to take the axe, and she didn't give it up, just shifted it to the other hand and kept going. He told me about it that evening with something that might have been admiration. On the third day, she asked me to sit with her. We sat outside at the edge of the camp where the light was low and the wind had died a little, and she told me what had happened. She told it the way a person tells something when they've held it alone long enough that it has worn grooves in them. Her husband had been Cheyenne, had been killed in a raid, Crow raider, 9 months ago when she was already large with the child. She had gone to her mother's people, but her mother was dead 3 years, and the relatives she found were not interested in a half Lakota woman with no husband and no horses and nothing to bring them. And after 2 months they made it clear enough that she understood, and she had left because leaving was less painful than the slow rejection that was coming anyway. She had been managing since October. 5 months. I sat with that. She said, "I'm not telling you so you'll feel sorry." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm telling you because you're the first person who's been straight with me in a long time, about what you want and what you don't, and I think I owe you the same." I said, "You don't owe me anything." She looked at me the way she'd looked at me that first morning in the draw, except something was different now. Not finished with being afraid. Something else. Something that had maybe come out the other side. She said, "I watched you these 3 days. The way you run this camp. The way people come to you and the way you answer them. The way you heard about the Crow boy we caught on the eastern border and sent him back with horses instead of doing what other men would do. I have been watching." I didn't say anything. She said, "I don't know what I am yet to this camp, or to you. I'm not asking you to name it. I'm just saying I see who you are." I said, "That's enough." She said, "Is it?" I said, "For now, yes." The child was in the camp behind us making sounds. She turned her head toward it, that compass needle motion, and she caught herself this time, caught me watching, and she let the turn complete anyway, not apologizing for it. I looked at the line of hills in the last of the light. Cold coming down off them, the way cold comes in the high country, solid, like something with weight. I said, "The storm I told you about. It was worse than I thought, My hunter came back this afternoon. Said the north is closed down for maybe a week. She said, then I'm here another week. I said, looks like. She said, I'll split more wood tomorrow. I said, I know you will. The storm came that night. It was bad. 3 feet over 2 days, wind that didn't stop, the kind of cold that gets into your bones by the second morning and stays. The camp held. We'd built well and we'd laid in fuel, and the horses were in the low ground out of the worst of the wind, and we lost nothing. I checked on the shelter where she slept twice that first night without her knowing, because that is the kind of thing a man does that he does not explain. On the second night the child had a fever, not terrible but real. She was awake with it when I came in the second time, sitting with him against her chest, and she looked up at me without surprise. I don't think anything was going to surprise her anymore. I sat down on the other side of the fire from her. I said, is he bad? She said, I don't think so, he's had worse. I said, what do you need? She said, I don't need anything, you've already. I said, what do you need tonight? She stopped. She said, someone to sit here. So I sat there. We didn't talk much. The fire, the wind on the skins of the shelter, the child's small breathing. Around the 3rd hour he settled, and the fever broke in the way fevers break, a sweat and then a slow ease, and she put her hand to his forehead and let out a breath I don't think she'd let out in months. I sat with her until morning. Not touching, not speaking much, just present. Which is sometimes the only thing a person can offer, and the only thing that is actually needed. When the storm cleared, I expected her to talk about leaving. She didn't. She fell into the camp's rhythms with a naturalness that I noticed, and my cousin noticed, and his wife noticed. The 3 of us exchanging looks the way people exchange looks when something is becoming obvious, and no one wants to be the first to say it. She learned the names of everyone quickly. She helped with things that were not asked of her. The children in the camp went to her with the instinct children have. She had a dry patience with them, never performing warmth, just giving it plainly when they asked for it. One afternoon I came back from the south pasture where we'd been checking on the horses, and I saw her in the middle camp sitting with 2 of the elder women, my aunt among them. They were working hide together, the 3 of them, and talking. My aunt laughed at something she said. My aunt does not laugh easily. That evening my cousin said, you know what's happening? I said, yes. He said, are you going to do anything about it? I said, not yet. He said, why not yet? I said, because she's been not decided about by enough men already. I wasn't going to be another one who moved too fast and made her feel like an object being taken up. He was quiet, then he said, you're a better man than I am. I said, that's already known. He laughed. It was another 10 days before I said anything to her directly, and by that time the camp had already decided for itself that she was staying. My aunt had moved her and the child to a better place, a warmer one, next to her own. The child was fat now, or beginning to be, the gauntness leaving him, and he had started doing the thing infants do at that age where they hold onto a finger and pull and then look astonished at their own strength. I found her at the river early, before the camp was up. She was breaking ice at the edge to get water, and she heard me coming this time and looked up without alarm. I said, I want to ask you something. She said, all right. I said, I'm asking you because I want an honest answer, and with you I think I'll get one. She said, ask. I said, is this where you want to be? She looked at the ice she'd broken up. She looked at the water moving under it in the dark way water moves in February, slow and certain. She said, yes. I said, is that because you have nowhere else? She said, no, I had nowhere else in October, that's different from this. I said, tell me how it's different. She looked up at me then. The light was coming barely, that gray pre-light that has no warmth yet, and her face was clear in it. She said, in October I was surviving. I would have gone anywhere warm. She said, "This is different because I have watched you and I know who you are now, and who you are is someone I want near me, is someone I want near my son." She said, "You set meat on my fire when you didn't know me, and you never once made me feel like that cost me something. And I don't forget that." She said, "That's how it's different." I held that. She said, "Now ask me the thing you actually want to ask." I said, "Will you stay?" She said, "Yes." Not "I'll think about it," not "maybe," not "let me see what you're offering." Yes. Plain and still, the way she did everything, with the river dark and moving at her feet and the camp starting to stir somewhere behind us. I took a step toward her and she did not move back. I put my hand against her jaw, just the side of her face, and felt the cold of the morning in her skin and the warmth underneath it. She put her hand over mine and held it there. The boy was in the camp sleeping. The storm was gone. The hills to the north were white and still, and the light was coming up over them the way light does after hard weather, clear, almost painful, like it forgot what it was supposed to hold back. I did not say anything, she didn't either. There are men who will tell you the moment they knew. The exact moment, the bolt of it, the revelation. I was never that kind of man. What I knew about her came the way you know about ground underfoot, not all at once but step by step, the give of it, the solid beneath the give, the way it holds. I knew when I saw her that first morning in the draw, not letting me see her hands shake. I knew when she said she wasn't telling me about the bark so I'd feel sorry. I knew when my aunt laughed. I knew when she put her hand over mine at the river. I knew all those times and none of those times, and it was not one thing but the accumulation, the way water changes rock, not the moment of impact but the long patience of it. She became my wife in the spring. My cousin cried at the ceremony, which he will deny to anyone who asks. The boy, her son, my son, both was walking by summer. He walked early, which she said was because of the bark, because of what his body learned in that first winter about how to take what it had and do more with it than seemed possible. I don't know if that's true, but I know what it is to do more than seems possible with what you've got. I have been doing that my whole life. She understood that without being told. When I think of her, I don't think of one thing. I think of the total of her, the knife in her hand the morning I brought the travois, the compass needle turn when the child made a sound, the way she split wood that second day with the axe that was a little too heavy, the way she looked at me at the river in the gray light and said yes like she'd already considered everything and had nothing left to qualify. She gave me her trust the way a woman gives trust when she has paid enough to know exactly what it's worth, not easily, not carelessly, not because she had no other choice. Because she looked and she decided, and what she decided was me. I have been a chief a long time. I have been given things I did not earn and asked to give things I did not have. I have been underestimated, and I have been overestimated, and both of those are their own kind of loneliness. What I was not before her was known. She knew me, watched me and read me and chose me knowing, and there is not a thing in this life that can be given to a man that comes close to that. The hills out here are still white until April. The river still locks up and has to be broken every morning. The cold still comes from the north the way it always has, solid with weight, and you learn to lean into it instead of away, or it will take you down. She leans into everything. That first winter she chewed bark. I have not forgotten it, and I will not forget it. I did not save her, I set meat on her fire. She was already saving herself and the boy both, had been for months before I came along, and she would have kept going with or without me maybe. I don't know. I don't let myself think too long about that. What I know is I set the meat down, and she let me, and neither of us made it into more than it was, and that was the beginning of an honest thing. That's all a man can do. Set the meat down and be honest about it, and hope the woman in front of him is the kind of woman who can tell the difference between a man who does it because he wants something and a man who does it because it's right. She could tell the difference. She always could.